Welcome to Vicious Whispers with Mark Tullius, your source for horror, sci-fi, suspense, and all things violent.
All right, thank you so much for joining me today on Vicious Whispers with Mark Tullius. At the end of the episode, we will play a short story from Twisted Reunion. Gonna keep with that one. That one is free to all newsletter subscribers. If you haven't picked that up yet, you should do so. There's also the audiobook, which you can pick up. I never fucking market my audiobooks. I'm terrible at that. I need to start rectifying that. But we will play a short story from that audiobook, the Twisted Reunion audiobook, at the end of this episode. That story will be Wrong Side Tavern. I think it's been a long time since we played it on here, and it's free, so fucking stop bitching. Jesus Christ. I'm just playing. You can bitch all you want. I'm in Tennessee. I just got to Knoxville this afternoon. Wednesday, I flew to Charlotte and then spent the night there. Got in pretty late. Drove to Asheville this morning to pick up books from Steve Montgomery, who is holding on to all the books for the Tennessee Books and Reader Convention, which starts tomorrow. Didn't have a chance to see Steve. It's his anniversary today. Happy anniversary, his third anniversary. But I will be seeing him on Monday when I return from Knoxville. I'll go train with him at American Top Team Asheville, North Carolina. And after that, we will have a quick lunch, discuss Super High, our last 3 scenes, so we can just finish this book. And then I will head on to the airport so I can get home. But before we get too much into this trip and all the Try Not to Dies that I'm working on at once, let's go back to last week. I think last time I talked, I was going to have a writing session with Coach West. It was his last day at 10th Planet Whittier. It's only going to be at 10th Planet Costa Mesa and Irvine. So we had a little party for him that night, Friday night. A lot of the 10th Planet Whittier family came to celebrate Wes abandoning us, and we had a pretty good time. Earlier that day, Wes and I had a pretty awesome writing session, figured out the last fight scene, how we were going to change it up, make each of the decisions in the fight worth something, and a little bit different from lots of other Try Not to Dies. Now the other ones have had that aspect in it, this little type of game. So we figured all of that out. Now we just need to write the goddamn thing. I haven't had time to put my notes in from our last 2 writing sessions because I've just been so busy with all these other books and with homeschool and with this and with that. But yeah, so it was cool having that party. Definitely going to miss him. But I will see him at 10th Planet Costa Mesa. I plan on going there at least once a week to have a workout with him. My son would love to do that as well. And maybe we'll have a joint writing sessions afterwards. Today I was working on a writing session with my son. This is part of his homeschool. And so we just did it over the phone. We were working on it at home together for the last 2 days. And then today was going to be the final day. He seems to work pretty well with me. And we knocked out a pretty good short story. He had to do a little parable. It's hard for me not to, want to offer too much advice, help him too much. So I have to really be cautious of that and like, no, you got to figure this out yourself. But here, say it out loud. And I realized today he had a very hard time telling me the story out loud, saying it out loud. I was explaining to him just how that is such a powerful thing for editing. If you do not read your work out loud, you will not catch. I mean, there's so much you won't catch anyways. But if you're not reading out loud, it just hurting your chances. Tom Spanbauer, when I was working with him, he would have me email the story to him, but then I would have to read it out loud. And so it is to hear how it sounds. You hear it yourself. And especially if you're reading it to someone else, they'll be able to hear it as well, like what works, what doesn't work. But you'll know as you're doing it. So that's what I was passing on to him today. It was cool that we got that done. I was bummed that he wasn't able to make it on this trip with me, but it's all good. This is a good opportunity. I realized this is more travel like it was when I was doing Unlocking the Cage, which is currently 99 cents. That's not why I brought it up, but maybe why it's on my mind. But for that book, I went to 23 states. My daughter, when I started, was like around, I don't know, she was pretty young. But I went to 23 states around the U.S., went into Canada real quick, 100 different gyms, interviewed MMA fighters to figure out why they fought and what kind of people they are. And that's where I met Steve Montgomery. That's another reason why it'd be really cool to go see him and train with him. On those Unlocking the Cage trips, man, I would just go from one place to another, and I'd be driving long hours and barely eating anything. Didn't care to stop, didn't want to take time to stop to eat at restaurants or anything like that. So it's like, I'll pick up something and I'll make it for the rest of the day. And just that's what I did on this trip. I think the first day I forgot to have lunch or dinner. Instead, I had like 800 calories of trail mix. And I was like, okay, that's it for the day. And then today I stopped once, and that's it. I haven't eaten again, just a little bit of snacks. So cutting down on calories. If I had my son, I'd feel guilty. I would feel the need to go get real food and that sort of stuff. So not having him for that, I'm able to concentrate more on all my stuff, all my writing, all my reading, editing. Oh, another cool thing that happened last week, right before I left, I got my special Try Not to Die custom axe. Yeah, someone hit me up. I hadn't planned on getting it. It's not something I thought I ever needed. But when the guy asked me if I wanted to get a custom axe, thought it'd be pretty cool to get a Try Not to Die one. So I went and had him put the logo on it. I think it looks pretty cool. You can see it on my newsletter. You should be subscribed to that, god damn it, by now. That's where you get all the cool stuff, and you'll get a good look at the axe. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Hopefully no one hurts themselves with it. I got to figure out where we're going to hang it. But yeah, really digging that thing. Oh, so another reason why this trip is kind of like unlocking the cage. I mean, I'm not doing the crazy training. I'm only going to train the one day at American Top Team. I'm not doing long driving hours. Say it was 3.5 or 4 hours. So that was a little bit of a drive. And then going back will be about the same, but probably broken up 2 hours and 2 hours. So no big deal. Nothing to compare to like the unlocking the cage. But I also feel guilty about going on this trip. I realized that, especially not taking my son. Originally, my son was going to go with me. So it was going to be great because I'd be handling his school. We'd be having a good time. My wife wouldn't have to worry about this handling the school or whatever else and feeding him and everything. So when we decided that he wasn't going, then I started feeling guilty. And I was like, man, do I really want to go? But what a great opportunity for me. Not only to be able to read all this work, but to go and talk with the authors that I'm doing Try Not to Die with. So I believe we have 4 or 5 different Try Not to Die authors, a couple who I'm currently working on their stuff. I had to really think about work this week because I'm having so many books come in at one time, trying to figure out, okay, whose do I tackle first? How much work does each book need? And then when am I going to be able to have the editor work on it? And then also covers created and all these things. So I was like, okay, that could be a lot, but I'm just going to take it one step at a time and see what happens. So I packed everything this week. I was working on Angel Van Natta's Escaping the Cult. Still need to get through this many pages. I was trying to hurry it up so I could get her at least the main story edited before I went on this trip. But then I wrote to her, I said, I'm just so busy with all this other stuff because I got in Robert Essig's Try Not to Die in This Damned House. Holy shit. So it's going to be the first extreme edition book of a Try Not to Die. And need to figure out how to do the cover, put some kind of warning on there. I will write a warning. I just wrote to Robert. I told him, hey, man, I was like, excellent writing, because it is. I love his style. But there was one scene where I was like, I can't do it. I couldn't even read it. I had to just like look past. I kept going like, oh. And probably for other people, maybe it wouldn't be that bad. But I don't think it was something that, like, if I'm not comfortable with it, I'm not comfortable handing it over to my Try Not to Die readers. So especially one that just came from a dark fairy tale or one of the chiller, more fun Wild West Try Not to Dies. But had a great conversation with him. I'll be meeting him tomorrow for the first time in person at the Tennessee Book and Readers Convention. So that will be awesome. And so that book will be coming out. We're just going to have to get the edit on that and the cover made. Cool to have the first extreme edition Try Not to Die. I think it'd be really cool to maybe have 2 others, and then that way we could do an extremely fucked up Try Not to Die box set. But if that happens, it happens. If not, no biggie. Yeah, because it was hard to read some of that stuff, and I will have trigger warnings in it. I already talked about Steve Montgomery, his Try Not to Die Super High, so I brought that as well. So we'll finish that up, those 3 scenes. I'm going to be talking with Edmund Stone. He sent me a draft of his first chapter and also the plot and stuff. So I still haven't had time to look at it. Not closely, not enough, but I'll try to do that tonight or tomorrow. And it won't take me that long, but I need good headspace to look at something new, to think about something new, think about styles, all that kind of stuff. So I will be doing that this weekend. I thought I could just take the plane ride. It's almost 5 hours to work on Angels. And I got to the airport, I was like, it's going to be too much of a bitch to be working on the computer, especially if I don't have enough room. So I was like, okay, I'll just read. Then the question is like, okay, what do I read? I already read Roberts. I had just finished up like the day before, but then this came in. So this is Try Not to Die in the Shadowlands by Andrew Najberg. So this thing, man, I read this on the airplane, almost finished it, and then I finished it this morning. Excellent. I couldn't think of one thing to change about it. So, what a wonderful present to me as a publisher. Because of all the backup with the Try Not to Dice, I might even be editing that one myself. I don't know. I need to talk with Lindsay and see how busy she is, how quickly we can do it, because this is an incredible book. It is ready to go. I'm going to be talking a little bit more with Andrew about it tomorrow. We're discussing the cover. So, yeah, another Try Not to Die easily before the end of the year. That would be, I think, at the latest, I would want this one released. Then, so sorry, Damon, but I did read Andrew's before I went back to Arcranium, but I did want to read that because I was going to be meeting Andrew. So I wanted to get that done first, but then I am going with Try Not to Die in Arcranium. This is a second draft. It is going to be awesome. I already glanced over it. I'm loving it. So what a cool job that is, though, right? It's like, it is a lot of work. It could be a lot of work, but when I take away, I was just talking to Andrew about this, when I take away the self-imposed pressure, it's just fucking awesome. It's so cool to have these, like with Andrews, like I just got to read an author whose book, I loved Golotok. I thought he did an incredible job. Love his writing style. I was super happy when he said that he wanted to do a Try Not to Die. It didn't take him very long, and he just knocked out an incredible book. But I was telling him, how cool is that? I got to be the first person to read this book, to experience it, to play it, to die in it every single way, and just enjoy it. You know, same thing with Roberts. Like with Roberts, it was different feelings because it's like, oh man, I felt all of that. I felt so much discomfort, so much horror, so much terror, and it was just it's different, but also super cool. So to be able to experience these books, to help write them, to be able to publish them, yeah, being able to publish them is pretty awesome. I'm excited to be having all this. It's not that much work. It could be work, but I also love what I'm doing. Oh, another cool thing. So this trip, on top of meeting all the new people, yeah, Jay Bauer, be talking with him. He has Try Not to Die in Brownsville. We have Robert Essig with Try Not to Die in This Damned House. We have Edmund Stone with Try Not to Die during the Tent Revival. We have Andrew Nosberg with Try Not to Die in the Shadowlands. And we have one other person who I totally forgot. E.L. Giles was going to be here. Originally, he was going to be my table partner, but he wasn't able to make it. So I won't be meeting him. But how cool is that? Like, I totally forgot. He's got a book coming out, too. I'm not sure when that one will be done, but thank God it's not right now, because holy shit, this is enough for right now. I got the coolest message from Kevin David Anderson. He needs about another month on his. I was like, yes, thank you. That's awesome. I don't want it right now. Like, take your time. I would take it, Kevin. If you were to give it to me, I would love to have it. It'd be exciting to read it. But I really do need to buckle down and get some work done. I'll do my newsletter. Tomorrow morning, I have to set up for the event, but I'll have a couple hours in between that. And when I have those couple hours, I'll be knocking out as much of Escaping the Cult rewrite as possible and reading Try Not to Die in Arcranium when I need a little break, and some other Try Not to Die stuff, or homeschooling my son, whichever comes first. All right, guys, as you can see, I have a lot of work to do. I haven't eaten yet. Not sure if I'm even going to. Yeah, I'm rolling on adrenaline today and lots of caffeine. But things are good. Let's go out on this. This is Wrong Side Tavern. Oh, and also before I forget, I mentioned Unlocking the Cage is 99 cents. We also have Trying to Die at Grandma's House, 99 cents, which it almost always is. Next week, or in a couple days, we'll have Ghostland for 99 cents in the US and the UK. We have 25 Perfect Days plus 5 more on sale for 99 cents as well. That one and Unlocking the Cage will be until the 13th. So pick those up while they are cheap. Those are at all retailers, but just double check the price before you purchase. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this story. Wrong Side Tavern off of Twisted Reunion. Have an incredible week, and I will talk to you later.
Wrong Side Tavern. Paulson logged off the computer and shut down the Amtrak's controls. What Hank would have been doing if it hadn't been for that damn van. The grisly accident outside San Diego had delayed his run by more than 2 hours. Overtime was always a pleasant addition to his engineer's salary, but the long day had taken its toll on him, and he was ready to get home. Hank waited until all the passengers were gone before he stepped off the train. A few of his porters nodded their goodnights, and Hank headed for the escalator instead of the employee parking lot. His truck was in the shop, and he lived within walking distance of the station. It would have been easy to grab a cab, but Hank wasn't in a hurry now that he was off the train. Plus, he could use the exercise, and with any luck, the midnight air would clear his mind. The wreck was still heavy in his thoughts. The woman's head poking through the windshield. It had been the van's fault. It had slammed right into her Camry and knocked her car through the crossing gates. Hank couldn't have stopped in time. Hank looked up and down the block, not quite sure which way to go. He'd never used the pedestrian exit, or actually walked home. The blinking yellow traffic light, barely visible through the fog, had to be First Street. All he had to do was cross the tracks, go left at the light, and then walk another 6 or 7 blocks. He'd be home in half an hour. 3 teenagers wearing blue bandanas were hanging out at the corner. Hank didn't know if he should nod, make eye contact with them, greet them, or just keep his eyes down. They kept staring at him, letting him know he had no business being on their street. Hank opted for studying the sidewalk and the broken glass before turning left at the corner, his hard soles clicking on the concrete. His footfalls weren't the only ones, though. The teenager's footsteps echoed close behind him. Hank walked a bit faster, fighting the temptation to turn around and ask why they were following him. Did he disrespect them by not looking at them, or was he simply an easy target? Why the hell hadn't he called a cab? They matched his speed. Hank crossed the deserted street, didn't bother to look both ways. 2 sets of footsteps crossed with him. The third thug stayed on the other side, walked directly across from Hank, who could see him out of the corner of his eye. Hank took both hands out of his pockets in case he had to defend himself, and accelerated his stride. He flinched when one of the guys behind him cleared his throat.
Man, I just love this speed walking shit. Great way to stay in shape, huh, dudes?
Nah, player. It just gets me all sweaty, said the other in a deep voice.
When I get sweaty, I get pissed.
The intimidation tactic was working, but Hank wasn't about to give up his wallet just yet. Despite his pounding chest and burning legs, Hank kept up the pace. He searched both sides of the street for any sign of life, tried to remember passing any gas stations or liquor stores whenever he drove through this run-down stretch of town. Whether it was his nerves or Deuce and his partner talking behind him, Hank couldn't recall anything being open this late. The only lights ahead of him were traffic signals. If Hank tried to run, he'd guarantee a beating, or maybe worse. He only had $100 or so in his wallet, which he would gladly part with if they would leave him alone. But now that he'd led them this far, Hank didn't think they'd just walk away. A small neon sign flickered up ahead. Wrong Side Tavern. Hank had never noticed it before. Below the sign was a flashing arrow pointing down the alley. Hank figured he could call a taxi or cops from inside the establishment, if he could make it to the entrance.
Hey, where you headed, white boy? Deuce called. You don't want to head down there.
Hank kept walking, prayed he hadn't just made a terrible mistake and trapped himself in a dead end. Another glow was coming from halfway down the dark alley. Not caring what the thugs thought of him, Hank took off running toward the flashing neon. The sound of his slapping shoes and thundering heart blocked out all other noise as Hank raced past dumpsters and inky puddles. His lungs were on fire when he reached the entrance. Hank grabbed hold of the handle and yanked the door open. Much lighter than it looked, it flew open and out of his hand, banged against the wall. Hank caught the door on the rebound and slammed it shut behind him. Gripping the handle, he braced for a tug of war, but no one tried to pull back. There weren't any noises in the alley either, but people in the bar were talking, probably wondering what kind of drug he was tripping on. Hank let go of the handle and headed for the counter, accidentally bumped a man on crutches. The man, missing a leg, continued toward the back of the dimly lit bar, mumbled something about Hank needing to watch where he was going. Hank walked toward the bar, unable to remember ever being in a place so grim and depressing. Still, it was better than being mugged or even killed. He studied the empty tables with their dingy white tablecloths. The joint wasn't dirty, but it had a bad feel to it, unlike any other dive bar he'd been inside. The patrons slouching in the booths that lined both walls weren't here to watch a game or pick up chicks. Their dejected faces told him they came to this bar for one reason: to forget. "Would you mind calling me a cab?" Hank asked the burly bartender with thick glasses. His right arm was missing just below the shoulder. Hank didn't mean to flinch. "Well, that was quick. What is it?" The bartender sniffed at his armpit. "Do I offend?" "Oh, no." Hank looked at the grimy window, unable to see anything in the alley. "I just had one hell of a day." The bartender said he understood and picked up the phone. "One at the wrong side." After a pause, he thanked them and hung up. "They're on their way. Care for a drink while you're waiting?" Although he promised himself he was done with that, at least on a work night, Hank said, "Oh, why the hell not? Give me that stout." He had a lot on his mind. The thugs outside, the paperwork he'd have to face in the following weeks, even though he couldn't have avoided the wreck. If anyone in the bar deserved a drink, it was him. Hank took a seat on the stool and noticed that a track ran the length of the counter. He pointed to the rails and asked, "So, who's on the wrong side, you or me?" Only having one arm didn't slow the bartender. He set the mug between two rail ties and sent it sliding to Hank. "I'm afraid it's everyone who sets foot in this place." Hank raised his drink and took a long swig. "That's not very uplifting." "Yeah, but it's a catchy name, don't you think?" Hank nodded and took another drink, tried to sound nonchalant when he asked, "Is there a back door to this place, maybe somewhere else the cab can pick me up?" "No, there's no back door." He motioned toward the entrance with his stump. "That's the only way in or out. Why do you ask?" I'd hate for the cabbies not to find this place." "No worries. They'll come down the alley and right up to the door." The man scratched his stumbly black beard and studied Hank, the hint of a smile on his lips. "Let me guess. Someone follow you?" "Yeah. 3 black guys." How'd you know?" "If they keep scaring people into here, I'm going to have to start tipping them. You're lucky, though. I've heard about a couple of people who didn't make it in here. I won't say it was them for sure, but it wasn't pretty. And Deuce is known to be good with his blade." Hank tried not to look at the stump. "They ever mess with you?" "No one ever messes with us. That's why we like this place. It's almost like we don't exist." Hank looked around the sparsely populated bar. I don't mean to be rude, but isn't part of running a bar wanting people to come in? Attract more business? The thing is, ever since my accident, money hasn't meant a thing to me." "Well, that must be nice." Hank finished his beer and checked his watch. "Did they happen to say how long it would be?" "Well, they always say 20 minutes. "Are they ever on time?" "Might as well make yourself comfortable. Looks like you could use another drink." Hank set his empty glass between the rails and slid it toward the bartender. It tipped over and shattered against the tie. "Aw, shit, I'm sorry," Hank said. The already quiet bar was now completely silent. He tried to help pick up the large pieces of glass, but the bartender waved him off. "Don't sweat it." The bartender held up a fresh mug and asked, "Another one?" Hank nodded, and the man filled the mug, set it between the rail ties, and slid it across the counter. Hank picked up his drink. "You make it look so easy. I didn't think I threw it that hard." The bartender leaned forward and whispered, "Glass gotta be full." Hank emptied his second round in 3 healthy gulps and handed it back. Maybe one more." The bartender poured another glass. "Hell of a day, huh?" "Hell of a year is more like it." "Work?" Hank nodded, tried to block the images from earlier in the day. The bartender slid the mug over. "What you do?" "I'm an engineer." "What kind? Mechanical?" Actually, I'm a train operator." "Dude, it was a joke. Take a look around." He pointed out the railroad signs plastered on the walls, the crossing signal next to the bathrooms, the various train paintings hanging from thick iron spikes jammed into the walls. "I know what an engineer is." "I'm sorry. My head's somewhere else." Hank took another drink. The bartender told him not to worry about it, and then excused himself to serve the wino in a wool hat at the far end of the bar. Hank looked at the large painting above the shelves of booze. He shuddered and set down his drink, afraid he might drop it. What kind of sick bastard would think the depiction of a train derailment was appropriate to display anywhere, especially in a place like this? Body parts scattered on the ground, some lying underneath the overturned engine car. Hank closed his eyes to block it out, but the death and destruction from the painting evoked images from today's accident, swirled together in a crimson collage. It didn't matter if the thugs were outside waiting for him. Hank slid off his stool, threw a 20 on the counter, and turned for the door. A beautiful brunette sat at the nearest table, her bright red blouse and matching beret a sharp contrast to the white tablecloth. Hank turned back to the bar, scooped up his money, and downed the rest of his beer. When the bartender returned, Hank asked who the woman was.
She's in here by herself, if that's what you're asking.
No, she just looks familiar.
None of my business who you know.
He polished a glass trapped between the counter and his waist.
Why don't you go talk to her?
Hank stole a glance at the woman and then asked for a whiskey. He promised himself he'd stop after this one. Hell, the taxi would probably show up before he even had time to finish. You wouldn't happen to know what she drinks, would you?
Can't say I've ever seen her in here before. That'd be a question for her.
That's fine. Give me a screwdriver, another whiskey, and a water.
You're the boss.
Hank balanced all 4 drinks in his hand and approached the table. She was so beautiful, her eyes so blue. Hank stumbled on his pickup line. One thing I can't handle seeing is a woman in need of anything, and I noticed you were without a drink. In a melodic voice, she said, "Thank you for noticing, but I don't drink." The good news is that I do. These 3 are for me. Hank set down the alcoholic beverages. The water is for you, though. Her smile almost made the horrible day bearable. That's thoughtful of you. Mind if I sit? Hank asked. I didn't think you'd want to. Now it was Hank's turn to smile, although he got the feeling he was missing something. As he sank into the chair, his legs disappeared beneath the long tablecloth. The woman didn't touch her water, but Hank started on his whiskey and asked, "So what in the world are you doing in a place like this?" She adjusted her beret and said, "I don't know. I was on the 415 and then something told me to come here." Hank wondered if he'd heard correctly. The 415? That's the one. Why? I just can't believe I didn't notice you. Did you take it too? Actually, I operate it. No fooling? Not wanting to appear conceited, Hank said, "It's really no big deal. The thing practically runs itself." When he asked, the woman said her name was June. She patted the back of his hand. "I'm sure you're just being modest. You have so much responsibility." I suppose it does take its toll." Hank finished his drink, set it down. "How do you mean?" Hank pulled over the screwdriver but didn't take a drink. No need for her to suspect he was an alcoholic. Cranking up the emotion like a sad insurance commercial, he said, "Sometimes bad things happen, but you just have to deal with it and go on." "What happened, Hank?" She gave his hand a light squeeze. "Did something happen today?" Hank let out a long sigh, nodded, and gulped down half the screwdriver. "What? An accident? Was it an accident?" "Yeah. Some van plowed into a woman stopped at the crossing. It caused me to hit her too." "What was he doing?" "He was probably high, or just stupid, maybe texting. They'll find out in the autopsy." June took his hand in both of hers. "How can you stand it?" "The funny thing is that I don't feel that bad. This one wasn't my fault. I braked. Hard. Almost all of them couldn't have been avoided." "You've hit others?" "There are over 1,000 deaths a year on the rails, and I'm afraid I've got 8 of those." "And you haven't quit?" Hank finished the screwdriver. "That's what I was saying. The people I've hit don't bother me that much. Most of them are just strung out on drugs and want to die. Instead of suicide by cop, it's suicide by train. A decent person will just slit their wrists or pop some pills, stay indoors,
Why mess up everyone else's day? That is pretty selfish. Why do you think so many trains are delayed and canceled? Well, I've never thought of it like that. Hank took a swig of the second whiskey. I feel worse about the animals. When I honk, they usually either freeze in fear or run directly down the tracks. I mean, imagine that. Imagine seeing someone's poodle sprinting for its life, knowing you can't do a thing to stop the tons of metal bearing down on it. June shook her head. That's awful. Hank wiped his hand on his pants and smoothed the wrinkles. Would you mind if we talked about something else? Of course not. I'm so sorry. Hank smiled at her and told her not to be silly. So, what about you? Is there a lucky guy waiting for you somewhere? June shook her head so hard her hat nearly came off. No one wants me. Are you serious? June cast her eyes down. I don't have a lot to offer. Don't say that. You're beautiful. That's something. June looked up, tears welling in her eyes. I know what I am. You're talking crazy. Hank got up from the table and said, I'm going to get you a drink. At the bar, while Hank was clearing his tab, a loud squeaking came from the rear of the bar. An elderly man pulled a rusty red wagon toward the bathroom. It was hard to see him in the dim light, but it looked like he was carrying a pile of dirty clothes. Here you go. The bartender handed Hank his change and said, it's just Jimmy. He's harmless. Hank carried 2 drinks back to the table. He took his seat and placed a bright green cocktail in front of June. I can't, really. She pushed it away from her. Hank took hold of her hands. Just try it. It's a Midori sour, almost no alcohol in it. I'm such a lightweight, Hank, and this stuff will run right through me. You need it. We both need it. He eyed his whiskey and said, Come on, beautiful. What do you say? June sighed and stopped pushing away the drink. I guess one won't kill me. That's more like it. Hank casually slipped his leg under the table, sticking it out to see how she'd react. If she pushed back against his foot, they'd be back in his bedroom within the hour. If she played it cool and moved away, it could take a date, maybe even a dinner or two. He was still blindly searching for her leg when the squeaking started again. What's with this place? Hank sat up, the mood ruined. What, they give discounts to cripples and crazies? June threw her head back in laughter. It was so loud it was almost terrifying. Not knowing what else to do, Hank asked, Look, are we going to do this or not? He held up his glass for a toast, mildly surprised when she joined him. He finished his whiskey and noticed a steady, dripping sound. It was coming from under the table. June set down her empty glass and asked Hank if he was okay. I think I must have spilled something. I'm sorry. It was probably me. I can be so clumsy sometimes. She licked her lips. Would you mind looking for me? Hank lifted the tablecloth and stuck his head under the table. A puddle of bright green liquid pooled around the legs of her chair. He was about to warn her to move her feet out of the way so they wouldn't get wet, when he realized she didn't have any. The green liquid dribbled out of June's exposed intestines and dangled a few inches below the ragged edge of her severed torso. Hank bolted upright, the back of his head slamming into the table, his mind filled with darkness. June's icy hands shocked him back into reality. She held both of his wrists, smiled as if nothing was wrong. I told you, it runs right through me. At least since this afternoon. Let go of me! Hank tried to pull his arms free and get up from the table. At least since this afternoon. Wait. He did know her. She was the woman from today. Where are you going, Hank? June squeezed his wrists, his tendons and bones grinding together painfully. Hank shouted for help, looked around the room, anywhere but at June, that beautiful face he'd seen sticking through the windshield. June wouldn't let go of him, even as he continued to back away, Her torso slid across the table, leaving a bloody trail as she knocked over their empty glasses. June's hat fell to the side, revealed her crushed skull that looked as if someone had hammered away at it with a brick. The skull he'd seen poking through the glass. But he hadn't done that. The van had hit her. It had run the flashing lights, slammed into her. Or had it? No, the woman had been stalled out on the tracks. Hank had seen her before the van came barreling at her. The van had been trying to help. Hank hadn't been able to hit the brakes in time. June crashed to the ground, brought the table down with her. Hank ripped his hands free, backed into the counter, and spun around. He yelled to the bartender, "Call the cops! Call someone!" The bartender smiled and scratched at his beard. And why would I do that? June dragged herself toward him on her elbows. Hank screamed, "Look at her!" "But you said I was beautiful," she wailed. The squeaking of the wagon made Hank freeze. The old man pulled the rusty red thing to the front door, dropped the handle. "To hell with you!" Hank shouted at June, to the bartender, to the patrons oozing out of their booths. He ran to the wagon and kicked the back of it, the pile of rags in the back falling out and somehow tangling around his legs. The rags were heavy, anchoring Hank to the floor. He tried to kick them off, but both of his legs were pinned. He looked down and saw a mixture of flesh and cloth, the raw meat nearly indistinguishable from the mangled jeans the woman had been wearing earlier today. Hank pulled on the door, but it wouldn't open. June kept calling him honey, creeping closer. The bartender whistled, tossed a sharpened rail spike in the air as he made his way over. The forms of disfigured patrons advanced upon the entrance that would never be an exit.